Welcome to the Bookworm Duo, where we explore a variety of books. Let's get started.
That's good.
Today we're taking a deep dive into Icon and the Idealist by Stephanie Gorton.
Oh, interesting.
It's all about Margaret Sanger and Ware Dennett
Okay.
and their intertwined lives.
Mm-hmm.
Two powerhouses who led the charge
Wow.
for legal birth control in the U.S.
Uh-huh.
back in the early 20th century. We've got excerpts from the book itself, so we can really get into the nitty-gritty of their personal stories and the world they were shaking up.
I love that, getting right into the source material. It's
Yeah.
so fascinating how these two women,
Right.
both fighting for the same cause,
Yeah.
had such distinct approaches, such different personalities. And you're right, the book does a fantastic job of
Yeah.
bringing their world to life, using their own words to paint a vivid picture of the era.
Okay, so before we get into the thick of it,
Sure.
you give us a little context. What was the social and political climate like back then?
Mhm.
I mean, we know Sanger's a household name,
Right.
but Dennett, not so much. Why is that?
That's a great question. That's actually a question that Gorton grapples with throughout the book.
Yeah.
It seems Dennett's contributions, though significant, have been largely overshadowed by Sanger's. More visible and, let's face it, often controversial activism. Imagine a time when even talking about birth control was taboo,
Wow.
considered obscene. This was largely due to the Comstock Act of 1873.
The Comstock Act.
Yes, which basically criminalized the distribution of information about contraception.
Wow. Talk about trying to turn back the clock. So with this restrictive law looming over everything, how did Dennett and Sanger even get started?
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. Their upbringing seemed pretty different too, right?
Absolutely. Dennett came from a privileged New England family, steeped in those progressive ideas.
Okay.
Her aunt was Lucia Ames Mead,
Okay.
a prominent social reformer, so those ideas were practically part of the family DNA. Dennett even described her childhood as being surrounded by New England granite, which I just love.
Love that.
Sanger, on the other hand, came from a large working-class Irish Catholic family.
Right.
Her father, a free thinker and advocate for social justice, instilled in her a feral independent spirit and a passion for questioning authority.
It's almost like they were destined to clash with the establishment,
Right.
but in very different ways.
Right.
So how did their personal lives play into their activism?
Well, both women had marriages
Yeah.
that challenged societal norms.
Okay.
Dennett's marriage to Hartley, an architect,
Uh-huh.
was full of intellectual sparring,
Oh, I see.
struggles to reconcile their views on marriage and sexuality.
Yeah.
Sanger's relationship with her artist husband, William,
Yeah.
was also tumultuous, marked by financial instability and
Yeah.
her growing commitment to activism, which often took her away from home.
It sounds like both were already pushing boundaries in their personal lives, even before they became involved in the birth control movement.
Yes.
What were some of those early experiences that really shaped their paths?
Well, for Sanger, it was a tragic encounter with a patient named Sadie Sachs.
Okay.
As a nurse, Sanger witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences of a self-induced abortion.
Oh, wow.
Sadie's death became a turning point, igniting Sanger's fierce determination
Wow.
to make birth control accessible to all women.
That's heartbreaking, but I can see how that kind of experience would fuel a lifelong passion.
Yeah.
What about Dennett? What brought her into the movement?
Dennett's journey was more gradual.
Okay.
Her own unhappy marriage and growing belief in women's right to control their own bodies led her to become an advocate for sex education.
Oh.
She penned a groundbreaking pamphlet in 1915
Right.
called The Sex Side of Life.
Hold on. The sex side of life.
Yes.
That title alone must have raised some eyebrows back then.
You bet it did. Dennett was a master of using bold, eye-catching language to draw attention to her cause.
Yeah.
The pamphlet was revolutionary for its time, explaining sex and reproduction in clear, simple language.
Yeah.
Something that was unheard of back then.
Okay, so we've got these two strong-willed women.
Yeah.
Both challenging the status quo in their own ways.
Yes.
Did they ever actually work together?
They did, but their collaboration was
Yeah.
marked by both cooperation and conflict.
I see.
In 1915, they both attended a meeting
Okay.
hosted by a wealthy supporter of the movement.
Well-
It was supposed to be a gathering of like-minded individuals,
Right.
but it quickly became clear that Dennett and Sanger
Uh-oh.
had very different visions for how to achieve their goals.
Uh-oh. Sounds like the stage is set for a showdown.
Huh.
What were the main points of contention?
Well, Dennett believed in tackling the Comstock Act head-on,
Okay.
advocating for full legal reform
Uh-huh.
and the free dissemination of information about contraception.
Okay.
Sanger, after facing numerous legal challenges,
Yeah.
particularly after the raid on her first birth control clinic in Brooklyn, began to favor a more doctors-only model.
The raid on her clinic. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, in 1916, Sanger opened a clinic in Brooklyn, offering free contraceptive services to women in a poor working-class neighborhood.
Wow.
It was a bold move that challenged the very foundations of the Comstock Act. Just 9 days after it opened, the clinic was raided by police and Sanger was arrested.
Wow, that must have been a defining moment for the movement. How did it shape Sanger's approach?
The raid and subsequent legal battles made Sanger realize that a more strategic approach was needed. She began to believe that by putting birth control in the hands of medical professionals, she could legitimize it and gain wider acceptance, both from the public and from lawmakers.
So she was playing the long game, trying to work within the system rather than directly challenging it.
Exactly.
Did Dennett agree with this strategy?
Not at all. She saw Sanger's shift as a betrayal of the movement's core principles, a capitulation to the very forces that were oppressing women.
Yeah.
This fundamental difference in strategy would create a lasting rift between them, shaping the future of the birth control movement in profound ways.
It's amazing how these two women, both fighting for the same cause, could have such different ideas about how to achieve it. It seems like their personal experiences and personalities really influence their approaches.
Absolutely. And as we delve deeper into their story, we'll see how these differences played out in the years to come, ultimately leading to both triumphs and setbacks for the movement. But one thing is for sure, both Dennett and Sanger were forces to be reckoned with.
So what happened next? Did the movement start to gain traction?
It did, but it wasn't a smooth ride.
Okay.
The 1920s saw a cultural shift, fueled in part by the rise of automobiles and changing ideas about sexuality.
Okay.
This created a more receptive environment for the movement's message. However, new challenges also arose, including the growing influence of the eugenics movement and its complicated relationship with birth control advocacy.
The eugenics movement, that sounds a bit ominous.
It was a controversial and ultimately harmful movement that aimed to improve the human race through selective breeding. Sadly, both Dennett and Sanger expressed eugenicist views at times.
Wow.
A complex aspect of their legacy that's important to acknowledge.
It's a reminder that even those who fight for social justice can hold beliefs that are problematic. It seems like the fight for birth control was fraught with challenges both within and outside the movement.
You're right. And as we move into the next chapter of their story, we'll see how they navigated these challenges, their successes, setbacks, and the lasting legacy they left behind.
This is already so fascinating. Before we move on, what do you think is the most crucial takeaway so far for our listeners?
I think it's the power of individual stories. Dennett and Sanger's lives and work show us how personal experiences, even conflicting ones, can shape social movements and ultimately contribute to lasting change. Their dedication, despite their differing approaches, paved the way for the reproductive rights we have today.
That's a powerful insight. And it makes me even more curious to hear what happened next in their incredible journey.
Me too.
Oh, yeah.
Let's dive in. It's incredible how much they achieved, even with all the opposition they faced. They were going up against deeply entrenched social and cultural norms, not to mention legal roadblocks at every turn.
Right. It's hard to fathom how taboo these topics were back then. Like the book mentions Dennett's involvement with the Twilight Sleep Association, which advocated for pain relief during childbirth. Nowadays, that seems like a no-brainer. But it was actually controversial at the time.
It's a perfect example of how what we consider basic healthcare today was once seen as radical. The Twilight Sleep movement was about more than just easing pain. It was about acknowledging women's suffering during childbirth and advocating for their right to a more humane experience. It was a step towards recognizing women's autonomy in healthcare.
It makes you realize how much progress has been made, but also how far we still have to go in certain areas. So while Dennett was fighting for mothers' rights, she was also working tirelessly on the legal front to challenge the Comstock Act.
Absolutely. She spent years lobbying Congress, meticulously researching legal precedents and building relationships with key lawmakers. Her goal was nothing short of removing contraception from the federal obscenity statutes, essentially legalizing it nationwide.
That's a pretty ambitious goal, but it sounds like she faced some pushback even from within the movement itself.
Yes, some people worried that her approach was too radical and could alienate potential allies. There were those, including Sanger, who felt that the doctors-only model was a more strategic and palatable path to gaining broader acceptance and minimizing legal challenges.
So even though they shared the ultimate goal, their strategies were often at odds. It must have been a delicate balancing act, trying to stay true to their ideals while navigating the political realities of the time.
Exactly, and as the movement gained momentum, the stakes became even higher. Sanger's decision to open that first clinic in Brooklyn was a bold move, and it really put the issue of birth control on the front page.
You're talking about the clinic that got raided, right?
Yes, just 9 days after it opened, police raided the clinic, and Sanger was arrested. This event, along with her subsequent trial and imprisonment, thrust her into the national spotlight. She became a symbol of the movement, but it also deepened the divide between her and Dennett.
Wow, what a dramatic turn of events. So how did this raid impact their already strained relationship?
Well, Dennett saw the raid as confirmation that Sanger's actions were too reckless and could jeopardize the movement's progress. She believed that a more cautious legal approach was necessary. Sanger, however, viewed the raid as a sign that the system needed to be disrupted. She felt Dennett's focus on legal reform was too slow and wouldn't bring about the immediate change women needed.
It's fascinating how one event could have such different interpretations. It highlights how their personalities and experiences really shaped their approaches to activism. But what about the public? How do they react to all this?
It was a mixed bag. Some were appalled by what they saw as an attack on traditional values and morality. Others, especially women who were suffering from unwanted pregnancies or had experienced unsafe abortions, saw Sanger as a hero, a champion for their rights.
The media must have had a field day with this.
Absolutely. Newspapers across the country covered the trial and the ensuing debates, often sensationalizing the story and framing it in terms of morality versus modernity. It sparked a national conversation about women's reproductive rights, even if much of it was fueled by outrage.
So even though it was a challenging time, it sounds like the movement was starting to gain some traction.
Yes. In the 1920s, the movement began to gain more acceptance, particularly among middle-class women. Social norms were evolving, partly influenced by things like the increasing popularity of automobiles. This new mobility gave young people more freedom and privacy, leading to shifting ideas about relationships and sexuality.
Hold on. Are you saying cars played a role in the birth control movement?
It might sound strange, but it's true. The rise of automobiles, along with other cultural shifts, helped create a more receptive environment for the movement's message.
It's fascinating how these seemingly unrelated events can connect and influence social change. It's like a ripple effect. So, with all this happening, did Dennett and Sanger ever find common ground?
Unfortunately, no. Their paths continued to diverge. Sanger was gaining influence, attracting wealthy donors, and building a powerful organization called the American Birth Control League, which later became Planned Parenthood. She focused on establishing clinics and advocating for the doctors-only model. This effectively shifted the movement's focus away from Dennett's vision of broad legal reform and open access to information.
That's kind of sad. But I understand how Sanger's approach might have been more pragmatic, especially given the social and political climate. So what happened to Dennett? Did she just give up?
Dennett was never one to give up. She remained committed to her vision of full legal reform, tirelessly lobbying Congress and challenging the Comstock Act in the courts in 1922. She achieved a significant victory when a judge ruled that doctors in New York State could legally prescribe contraception for health reasons. It was a major step forward, but still fell short of the nationwide legalization she had fought for.
It sounds like a bittersweet victory. The movement was making progress, but it was also becoming increasingly fragmented. Was there anything else going on during this time that influenced their work?
Yes, the eugenics movement was gaining traction, and its relationship with the birth control movement was complicated and in some ways troubling.
I remember reading about that in the book. It's a dark chapter in history, and it's important to understand how it impacted the fight for birth control.
Eugenics was based on the flawed idea of improving the human race through selective breeding, often advocating for the sterilization of people deemed unfit, including those with disabilities or from certain racial and ethnic groups. It's a horrifying concept, and it's crucial to acknowledge that both Dennett and Sanger at times expressed views that aligned with this movement.
It's a stark reminder that even people who fight for social justice can hold beliefs that are harmful and discriminatory. It's important to learn from these complexities and avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. So the 1920s were a time of both progress and setbacks for the movement. What happened next?
Well, just as the movement seemed to be gaining momentum, the Great Depression hit. And it had a devastating impact on social reform efforts, including birth control advocacy. Both Dennett and Sanger faced enormous personal and professional challenges during this difficult period.
It's hard to imagine trying to fight for these issues during such a tumultuous time. How did they cope?
Dennett struggled financially and faced growing opposition to her work. Sanger, however, leveraged her connections with wealthy donors to secure funding for her organization. But she also drew criticism for focusing primarily on serving middle-class white women, further highlighting the class and racial disparities within the movement.
So even amidst a national crisis, the tensions between their different approaches continued to simmer. It's a testament to their dedication that they kept fighting for their cause despite facing such adversity. But I'm curious, did anything change? Does the movement manage to make any headway during the Depression?
It did, and a landmark legal case in 1936 shifted the landscape dramatically. It's known as US v. 1 package, and it involved a doctor who imported diaphragms from Japan. The court ruled in his favor, stating that federal law didn't prohibit physicians from distributing contraception for health purposes. It was a pivotal moment.
So after years of struggle, the doctor's only model, the Sanger champion, finally gained legal recognition.
Yes, it was a significant victory for the movement. This ruling effectively legalized the distribution of birth control by medical professionals, opening the door for wider access across the country. It was a significant step towards recognizing women's reproductive rights.
I bet Sanger was thrilled. But what about Dennett, given her stance on full legal reform?
Yeah,
I imagine she had mixed feelings about this win.
you're absolutely right. Dennett viewed the one package ruling as a limited victory, a step in the right direction, but not the end goal. She argued that relying on judicial decisions rather than legislative reform was inherently risky because it left the door open for future legal challenges and reversals. She also pointed out that this doctors-only model still created barriers for women who lacked access to health care or couldn't afford to see a doctor.
Her concerns were valid. Even major legal victories can have limitations and unforeseen consequences. So what happened to her campaign for full legal reform? Did she continue to fight for it despite this partial win?
Dennett never wavered in her commitment to full legal reform. In fact, she faced her own legal battle in 1929 when she was indicted on obscenity charges related to her pamphlet, The Sex Side of Life.
Wait, seriously, that pamphlet was published way back in 1915. Why was she being targeted for it now, after all these years?
It's unclear why she was suddenly facing these charges, but some speculate that Sanger's supporters may have played a role in bringing the case against her. Remember, their visions for the movement were drastically different, and Sanger's faction may have seen Dennett's legal challenges as a threat to their progress.
That's a pretty unsettling thought. It seems like the internal conflicts within the movement were just as intense as the external battles they were fighting. So what was the outcome of Dennett's trial?
Initially, she was convicted and fined, but Dennett, being the fighter that she refused to pay and appealed the verdict, it was a long and arduous process. But in 1930, the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals overturned her conviction, citing freedom of speech and the importance of sex education. It was a resounding victory for Dennett and a major blow to censorship efforts. It also highlighted the enduring relevance of her work, even as Sanger's approach gained more traction.
It's inspiring to see her standing up for her beliefs and ultimately winning, even when facing such personal and professional risks. It seems like both women continued to make strides, even though they were often at odds with each other. But the book also delves into the more complicated aspects of their legacy, particularly their association with the eugenics movement.
That's right. It's important to acknowledge that both Dennett and Sanger express eugenicist views at times, and this is a difficult part of their story to reconcile. It serves as a stark reminder that even those who fight for social justice can be influenced by the harmful ideologies of their time.
It's a sobering reminder that history is rarely black and white. Even those who champion progress can hold beliefs that are later deemed unacceptable. So as we move towards wrapping up our deep dive into Icon and the Idealist, what are some key takeaways you'd like our listeners to ponder?
I think it's crucial to recognize Dennett and Sanger's story as a testament to the power of persistence, resilience, and unwavering commitment to a cause. Despite facing overwhelming obstacles, personal setbacks, and disagreements, they never gave up on their fight for women's reproductive rights. Their dedication paved the way for the reproductive freedoms we have today.
Their story is truly inspiring, and it's fascinating how their different approaches, Dennett's focus on legal reform and open access to information versus Sanger's more pragmatic doctors-only model, highlight that there are often multiple paths to achieving social change.
Absolutely. And those paths are rarely straight lines. They're full of twists, turns, and unexpected detours. Even within a movement, there can be disagreements and tensions about the best way to achieve shared goals.
It's a valuable reminder that progress isn't always neat and tidy. It often involves messy debates, compromises, and setbacks along the way. Before we move into the final part of our deep dive, is there anything else from this chapter of their story that stands out to you?
What strikes me is how both Dennett and Sanger navigated the challenges of the Great Depression while continuing to fight for their cause. It shows their unwavering commitment even amidst personal hardships and societal upheaval. It's also a reminder that even during times of crisis, the fight for social justice must continue. It's often during these challenging times that progress is most crucial.
It's powerful insight. Their unwavering dedication in the face of such adversity is truly remarkable.
It's remarkable how they both persevered through such challenging times. And speaking of perseverance, let's talk about what happened to Dennett. After that obscenity trial, she scored a huge victory in 1930 when her conviction was overturned.
That's right. Freedom of speech won the day. It was a big win for sex education and for Dennett personally.
Exactly. This victory really solidified her legacy as a tireless advocate for free speech and access to information. Even though she and Sanger had their differences, they were both chipping away at the same wall of restrictive laws and social taboos.
It makes you wonder how history might have unfolded differently if they had presented a more united front. But their clashing personalities and strategies were just as much a part of the story as their shared goals. So where did things go from there? The doctor's only model was legalized, but Dennett was still pushing for full legal reform. Did either of them achieve their ultimate vision?
Well, not exactly. Neither woman lived to see the full realization of their goals. Dennett passed away in 1947 and Sanger in 1966, but their efforts, both individually and collectively, laid the groundwork for the landmark Supreme Court decision in Griswold v. Connecticut in 1965. This ruling finally struck down the remaining Comstock laws and affirmed the right to privacy in marital relationships, including the right to use contraception.
So even though they didn't witness it themselves, their tireless work paved the way for this monumental victory. It's a testament to the lasting impact of their activism. But I'm curious, did their personal relationship ever improve, or did they remain at odds until the end?
Sadly, their personal relationship never fully recovered. Their fundamental disagreements over strategy and tactics created a rift that proved difficult to bridge. However, both women continued to fight for their cause until their deaths, leaving behind legacies that are both inspiring and complex.
Their story reminds us that even the most dedicated activists are human with their own flaws and blind spots. It's important to acknowledge those complexities while still recognizing their enormous contributions to the fight for reproductive rights.
Absolutely. History is rarely simple, and these two women were incredibly complex figures. They were pioneers who challenged the status quo and paved the way for a more just and equitable world, but they were also products of their time, and their views sometimes reflected the prejudices and limitations of their era.
It's a reminder that we need to be critical of our heroes, acknowledging their flaws while still celebrating their achievements as we wrap up our deep dive into Icon and the Idealist. What's the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think it's this: the fight for social justice is rarely a straightforward path. It's often messy, complex, and full of disagreements, even among those who share the same goals. Dennett and Sanger's story shows us that progress can be made despite these challenges, but it requires persistence, resilience, and a willingness to learn and adapt along the way.
It's a powerful lesson for anyone who wants to make a difference in the world. Dennett and Sanger's lives and work remind us that even when we disagree on the how, we can still work towards a better future. They left behind a legacy that continues to inspire and challenge us today. Thanks for joining us. Subscribe for more bookish adventures and hit that like button if you enjoyed the ride. Don't forget to share the knowledge. Spread the word.